Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, and it's time, Sam, to wrap up our team-by-team grades. It's the AFC and NFC South. If you missed it already, we hit the North, the East, the West. It's time for the South here today. How you doing, man?
Time for the South. Last but not least, because some of the most interesting drafts in the South.
Yeah, so we've had obviously a lot of extra shows this week, and so programming note, we've been going pretty hard since Thursday night, over 20 hours of draft coverage, I believe it's been. Maybe more, 25, 30, I don't know, losing track. Tomorrow, we have a very special episode. We're going to get some other voices in here. We did track down Trevor from PFF, ask him about the draft board, his favorite drafts, the whole thing. So we have Trevor, we have Lance Zierlein from the NFL, and we have Danny Kelly from The Ringer. So we're excited to have some other voices, and we're going to get their takes on the draft, their favorite drafts, least favorite drafts, any other big stories. So that's going to be tomorrow's show, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, right here on Check the Mic. But once again, appreciate everybody for being with us all week. One last thing before we start, our friend Doug Kide is doing a fundraiser in honor of his daughter, Haley, PrincessHaleyForever.com. They're raising money for leukemia, and we have, as a podcast, donated a minimum of $1,000. We've decided, hey, Check the Mic. We're gonna help support this as a pod, and then we encouraged all of our listeners, if you want to donate, at PrincessHaleyForever.com. Donate, put our name in there, put Check the Mic in there, put CTM in there so they can keep tabs on it, and we'll match it. So we'll put 1,000 minimum, and then we'll match it. It's over at PrincessHaleyForever.com. You just add a, yeah, go do it, Sam.
Yeah, go do it.
Great. Can already tell it's going to be a great show. All right, let's go. AFC South. Do we have a hard out today? We'll get this in two.
No, I'm good.
All right, AFC South. We're going to start in order of the order that the teams drafted. So the Titans usually pushed off to the end when we go alphabetically, but I like this. Titans are going first here in the AFC South. Of course, they kicked it off with Cam Ward at the top, the number one overall pick. Cam Ward from Miami, the quarterback. In the second round, they go Oluwafemi Oladejo. I had it ready, and then I screwed it up. Oladejo from UCLA, the edge rusher. The Titans made some trades here. Remember, they didn't have a pick until the third round, so they did maneuver the draft board a little bit to make sure that they had second and third round picks here. Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State, the safety, was their third round pick. Chimera Dike, wide receiver out of Florida, was their first fourth rounder, the first pick of round 4. They had two more fourths. Gunnar Helm, the tight end out of Texas. Alec Ayomanor, the wide receiver out of Stanford. And then fifth rounder Jackson Slater, guard from Sacramento State, and a couple other sixth rounders here. So your thoughts on this? A lot of people really liked the Titans draft. And I know when you're evaluating drafts, how much credit do you give them for just doing the expected thing? Whether you care or not, it's still a pretty good group of players here for the Titans, for Mike Bergonzi in his first draft.
Yeah. I'm always confused by the people that give incredible draft grades for a team that's picking number one overall, and they take the consensus number one overall pick. Like it's almost like a given starter to me. Like it's just already in the equation. It's already on your team. We've known for a long time now that Cam Ward was going to be the number one overall pick. Now they still have to do it. They still have to turn in the card, etc. But I find it hard to give credit for that. It's like, it's just the sort of, it's almost like the default starting point of the draft was number 2 overall, not number 1 overall. We just basically penciled Cam Ward onto the team already. So I find it a little strange to be like, that's an incredible draft haul. It's like, yeah, but he's already been on the team for weeks now.
Yeah. So again, whether you're grading, if you're grading process, it might change things. If you're grading, hey, here's what they brought in. But let's talk about Cam Ward, because, you know, maybe that guy got overshadowed a little bit by the other quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, who went in the 5th round. But Cam Ward, why did he go number 1 overall? A fascinating ascent here from Incarnate Word a couple years ago to Washington State to Miami. I remember watching him before the season and just putting out onto Twitter and into the ether there that this could be the guy that breaks out this season. This could be the guy that has that massive, I called it just Heisman level breakout, but all the tools to have the type of season that he had at Miami. And he did. I mean, and he did. And he elevated that team. You could see it from week 1 against Florida, the arm talent, his ability to make plays inside and outside of structure, his ability to get the ball down the field. I think he was the clear number 1 quarterback in this draft. And I think the Titans, there were some other options here for the Titans. I'm sure Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter were intriguing, especially with a first-time GM and overhauled front office. I'm sure they thought about trying to get the haul that the Bears got a couple years ago when they traded out of the Bryce Young spot. And that has set the Bears up with a better roster. I'm sure they thought about it, but they obviously liked Cam Ward enough to just make the pick.
Yeah, in a funny way, the Titans draft and Cam Ward have been not just a little overshadowed, but completely overshadowed in the entire draft process. And actually, I think to a large degree, Cam Ward has kind of gotten by without the nitpicking that usually takes place for top quarterback prospects. Like, he was such a sort of consensus number one ranked quarterback in this draft. And all the attention went towards the reasons the other guys didn't stack up, right? So why Shedeur Sanders didn't belong in the conversation and was going to slide. And then obviously his draft weekend fall. But, why Tyler Shough didn't belong in that conversation, why Jackson Dart shouldn't be a first-round pick, why, Jalen Milroe didn't belong there. And because everything was sort of focused on why all the other guys weren't Cam Ward never got the kind of real, critical analysis, I think, that a lot of other top quarterback picks get. And even a year ago, right? Even Caleb Williams, who was seen as the consensus number 1 guy, you did start to get but what about this for Caleb Williams? And, are we sure? And would we go Drake May? Would we go Jaden Daniels? Cam Ward has just been sort of pillar to post. Well, he's the number 1 guy now. He's the guy that's easiest to make the case for. And while I do think it's right that he was the number one overall pick and the number 1 quarterback in this draft, I do feel like his flaws have been kind of papered over, or at least glossed over and ignored a bit, because all the critical focus has been on the other quarterback. So let's start with the good. He's the easiest of all these top quarterbacks to paint the optimistic picture for, right? He's got the easiest physical tools to align yourself with. 6'2", 223 pounds was his official measurements. Easy velocity with his arm. Like, he can just fire a frozen rope from pretty much any arm angle, from pretty much any foot platform as well. He doesn't need his feet underneath him to do all that. He's athletic. He's not, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels level of athletic, but he's functionally athletic. He can, extend plays extremely well in the pocket. He can buy time running around to the backfield. I view it as somewhere in the kind of prime Russell Wilson era of athleticism, like something like that. So all of that together, and he's he makes a lot of big plays down the field with that arm, with that athleticism. So you put all that together, it's a very easy picture to see, right? This is why he's going to be good. And, the college production paints a very flattering picture as well. Career 158 touchdowns, 37 interceptions. So a lot of people like to use, touchdown to interception ratio as a kind of broad strokes idea of production and decision-making. And that's been very good basically throughout his college career. And this most recent season, a spectacular performance with a 92.9 PFF grade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the easiest kind of guy to align yourself behind. But one thing that didn't come up that much, he has never had a single season where his turnover-worthy play rate has been below 3.3%. That's pretty high, right? Yep. And compare especially it to a guy like Shedeur Sanders, who's
high in the NFL. It's high in the NFL. It's especially high in college.
Right. And you compare that to a guy like Shedeur Sanders, whose rate is basically half that. And we brought this up when we talked about Cam Ward and the quarterback prospect or the quarterback ranking show. He is a big game hunter, stylistically. Like, he wants to make the special, explosive, big play down the field to the exclusion of, taking the profit a lot of the times. Like, he will pass up open underneath throws to go big game hunting and go trying to find a big one. And that gets him into trouble sometimes. And then the other thing that gets him into trouble is being on that Josh Allen to Will Levis spectrum of crazy, right? It's a very fine line between lunatic and genius. And he toes that line sometimes. And a lot of the times he comes down on the right side of it, right? It's like, great, that's an amazing play. That's a playmaker. it's like a fraction the other way, and it's a lunatic play, and that's where the Will Levis side comes down. So I think he's a really interesting quarterback prospect. I think he does belong number one. I think he's a good prospect. I think he's like he belongs in the group from a year ago. Maybe not the Caleb Williams level, but like the second tier of that top six where we were talking Bo Nix, Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy. I think he belongs in that group of quarterbacks. But I do think that there's a lot more risk attached to Cam Ward than we've heard about given this whole process.
Yeah, but to repeat what I've said a lot throughout the process here, there might be some individual plays that remind Titans fans of what Will Levis did, but I think the reason for them is different, right? Will Levis, maybe in the heat of the moment, makes some panic plays that just aren't great. And Cam Ward, as you mentioned, it's like this fine line between genius and, wild and crazy. And so to make the other plays, to make the scramble to his left against Louisville and throw a frozen rope 35 yards down the field for a touchdown, and to do something similar against Florida, you might have to deal with a throwback across his body again against Florida or against Cal, the pick six. I mean, they're just bad. Like, those remind me of Josh Allen, right? They're just bad decisions. But the credit I always gave Cam Ward is there's maybe one or two in a game and he bounces back from it. He comes back. It doesn't affect him. He doesn't implode. Cal game in particular, they're down 3 scores. He makes the comeback. So I think he elevated Washington State. I think he elevated Miami last year, even though they didn't get into the college football playoff. They ended up tapering off toward the end. I thought they were going to make a run, and Cam Ward was a big part of that. So, yeah, there's a boomer bust style to his game. High big time throw, high turnover worthy plays, some running ability, the ability to stretch the field. That all needs to be acknowledged. But he's also the most likely in this draft to become the coveted top 8 to 12 quarterback, we'll say, right? He has the most likely skill set to develop into that. So that's why the Titans make the pick at number 1 overall. And then they did anything else on Cam before we get through the rest of their draft class?
That last point is critical, right? In this world where we're not really shooting for starter anymore, right? We are shooting for a guy that can be a top 8 quarterback that can go toe to toe with the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, the Joe Burrows of the world in the postseason, Lamar Jackson, and come out on top, right? You need a special skill set for that. Cam Ward is the easiest to envision a world where that comes true because he's got the arm, he's got the athleticism, he's got the big playability. You just need to tidy up the negative plays and the bad plays. And as much as, that's sometimes that's a pipe dream. Like sometimes you can't tidy those up and those are just part of the dude. It's just easier to imagine that world than it is for, let's say, a Shedeur Sanders where he doesn't have the special physical traits. And you're like, well, so he now needs to become Joe Burrow, right? He now needs to become like an absolutely savant decision maker because he doesn't have an insane arm and insane athleticism. It's just much easier to imagine the first guy than the second guy. So that in a nutshell is why Cam Ward was almost pillar to post the number 1 guy in this prospect or in this draft. Once people started to dive into it, it's like this guy could become one of those top 10 quarterbacks if we tidy up the negatives.
So let's go through the rest of the offense right now and what they have and what they added in this draft. I'm not going to go as far as maybe what RG3 put out there, that the Titans have the, quote, perfect offense around Cam Ward. I think he had some sort of crazy take with the Dan Moore edition and the receivers that they added. It's perfect. Tyler Lockett. But they've done some work on this offense, a bad offensive line for multiple years. They do bring in Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, move JC Latham over to the right side. Kevin Zeitler comes in at right guard. They are in creep back toward average territory. Peter Skoronski heading into year 3. I think they've got the pieces to have a mid-level offensive line, maybe even better, right? If Latham, there's a step forward for a Latham in year 2 and Skoronski in year 3 and the whole thing. So I think they're in a better spot there. The receivers that they've added, Calvin Ridley is technically the 1 here. I've always liked Ridley as a 2. I don't think that goes well when Ridley's the top guy, but they brought in Tyler Lockett on the 1-year free agent deal as just another, just dependable, getting older veteran presence. But the 2 draft picks, Chimera Dike runs 4.3, legitimate deep threat for Florida. We kept pairing Cam Ward with a guy like Jalen Knoll, similar idea, but DK could be the guy who is the beneficiary of Cam Ward's 60-yard bombs down the field. And then Alec Ayamanor, the receiver from Stanford, getting him in the 5th he's the one guy that, interestingly enough, Travis Hunter being in the AFC South, when you go back and you say Travis Hunter's a great corner, but there was this one game, it was A.O. Manor from Stanford who absolutely wrecked him for about 190 yards. It was only one game, but it is interesting. They're both in the same division. And A.O. Manor, I didn't like him in the second or third where people were talking about him, but I love him in the fifth because as a big guy that moves well, I thought just needed to polish up some general receiving skills. And I love that as a fifth rounder.
Yeah, Dinkleberg, whatever that guy's name is, in the chat with a super chat asking where would Ward rank in last year's quarterback class and why. I think again in that second tier, I probably would have ranked him fifth in last year's class, so behind McCarthy, but ahead of Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. Off the top of my head, though, it's difficult to do it, a year removed or a year afterwards. Because of the reasons we said, right? Like he's got the physical tools to be in that conversation, but he makes more big mistakes than some of those other guys as well. And I don't think his overall level of performance has been as good as the top tier guys. So I think I'd have had him fifth in that whole group of 7 guys.
If I could get into my own headspace of last year thinking about the prospects, I still would have, I probably would have had Caleb Williams, then Drake May, then Jaden Daniels. I definitely would have liked May over Daniels. So I'm not going to change that history. I think I would have had Cam Ward next, though. I think I would have said there's too many questions with J.J. McCarthy carrying an offense. I'm going to go Cam Ward here. I didn't love Bo Nix. I thought he was the clear 6. And Michael Penix Jr., his big question marks were the knee injuries and everything. So if you talk about questions, it'd be Cam Ward's consistency versus J.J. McCarthy's volume versus Michael. Yeah, so I would have said 4th for last year. Anyway, thoughts on those receivers, then we'll get into the rest of the draft here with the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you paint yourself into a picture of being over your head over heels in love with this receiving core. Like Calvin Ridley is a pretty clear sort of number 2 wide receiver in most offenses. They still don't really have the number 1 guy. Tyler Lockett looks like he's very much into the decline of his career. If you look, like the Titans have a history now of like being the last stop for a receiver about to call it a career. Randy Moss, Titans legend, right? That kind of thing. Tyler Lockett could easily be the next one of those guys. Like I love Tyler Lockett. He's had an incredible career, but he looks like he's pretty close to being done. It's kind of hard to imagine him having a bounce back season in Tennessee with a rookie quarterback at the helm and et cetera. So you're talking Calvin Ridley, who's got a ceiling as a number 2, Tyler Lockett, who's on the way down and is probably a number 3. Then you've got that mix of, well, who's going to step up and be the other guy? Is it going to be Ayumenor right off the bat? Are they going to get something out of Treylon Burks, the former first-round pick? Van Jefferson is there. They've added another couple of rookies, including Cam Ward's favorite college receiver, Xavier Restrepo, is an undrafted free agent who,
like that,
a slot guy only who ran a 4.8, but gets open, makes plays, right? Is a football player despite horrific workout numbers. So, I mean, look, there's some players to throw to, but overall, this looks like a weakness, I think.
Just to touch on the other players here, second rounder, Olufemi Oladejo from UCLA. He was kind of a late riser in this process, was a linebacker at UCLA, late conversion to edge. I think there's, you could see the development in his game. He's got a couple, go-to moves off the edge, and then UCLA still used him as a stand-up linebacker rushing the passer. Did a pretty nice job at the Senior Bowl. I didn't love him as just a pure edge when there's other edge rushers in this class, but if you're watching on YouTube, you could see the stand-up snap here against a center where I think you can move him around and create some mismatches up front. They needed any kind of juice off the edge. I don't know if he's polished enough right now. It might take another year or 2 for him. And then I really liked Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. If he didn't get hurt out in the second game last year, we're talking about him as one of the best safeties in this draft. Sure tackler, 98th percentile missed tackle rate on the positive end. Low, as far as lowest missed tackle rate in this in the last 10 years among safeties. So fantastic tackler, short area range, short area coverage player. He's pretty athletic. Don't like him in zone better than man, but I think Winston's a good player in the third round as well. So between those two, DK, Manor, I think they have some players to contribute here.
Yeah, and remember, they sort of traded down from the top of the second round where they could have been in that market of the guys that slipped out of day one. They traded a bit down, and they draft Oladejo, who's a really interesting player. Like I do think maybe it's a tiny reach where they got him, but I kind of think that's the right area given the physical tools that he's bringing to the table. He's incredibly raw and inexperienced, but he's barely played the position. He kind of converted to being a full-time edge like a month into the 2024 season, effectively, was when he first started playing like all the time as an edge rusher. He's 6'3", 261, and the tools are there. Like even just from those Senior Bowl clips, you could see the physical traits that he's bringing to the table. So you would expect him to have like inconsistent hands, inconsistent moves. The timing isn't really there. Like he's extremely raw, but you can see the upside. I mean, we've been like Jalen Walker went in the middle of the first round with a similar sort of lack of experience. I think he's further along in terms of just pass rush ability right now, but he's also smaller. I mean, people are complaining about Jalen Walker only being 6'2", 245, 248. Like Oladejo is bringing 15 more pounds to the table. He's a bit longer, a bit taller. I like him as a mid-second round not gamble, as an upside play. Like I think he's exactly the type of raw prospect that could become a day one talent, but because of the question marks, the lack of experience, etc., he's available midway through the second round.
Yeah, you mentioned the Titans trading down from the top of the second. They had the 34th pick in the draft, I believe, or 35th pick in the draft. They end up picking 52nd. They pick up the extra pick at 82. That's where they got Winston, because they were going to go pick 35 and then 103. So they got the extra selection in there, which I thought was a good move. I thought they were a candidate for that because they were so thin with top 100 pick. So I thought it was a good move for them to add some of that volume. We know it all.
It's worth it of just taking a beat to say, well, what was available at that spot, right? So if they were going edge rusher with their next pick and they'd stayed at 35, 34, wherever they were picking, Donovan Ezeraku was on the board at that point. He slipped into the second round. So that's part of this dynamic, right? That's the calculus. Would you rather have Ezeraku and not pick up an extra pick, or would you rather trade back, pass up on Ezeraku, get Oladejo instead, and also extra draft picks? So like Scorton as well was in the similar, though I think Scorton was on the board when they picked. No, he went one pick ahead of Oladejo.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the simple calculus would be Oladejo and Kevin Winston, that's a pick they got from Seattle in that trade, versus, say, Ezeraku, if you were going to go edge. Obviously, there's other players to pick there too, but one Ezeraku versus Oladejo plus Winston. On paper, that looks like, all right, great. I mean, I love Ezeraku, but two for the price of one. Over time, I think wins out, and I think it was a good move for Tennessee.
So, yeah, the three edge rushers that effectively went off the board between when they would have picked and when they did pick with the extra draft pick are Ezeraku, Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, and then who was the third? JTT from Ohio State. Yeah. So those three were the players they effectively passed up in order to pick up an extra draft pick and then draft Oladejo.
All right, as we know, we'll move on in a second here. We know it all comes down to Cam Ward and his development, but I think they did a nice job. Mike Bergonzi in his first official draft here, doing a nice job in a draft where he's given pick 1, pick 35, and then nothing else until 103. Let's go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're next because they picked second, even though they were number.
Just to put a bow on that, in the consensus sort of gradings using Rene Bugner's sheet that tallies up 25 evaluators and the various grades they got, the Titans were basically slap bang middle of the pack. They got 15th overall in the consensus GPA, ranging from an A, couple of A's, 3 A's in there, all the way down to the standard Thor D on the far side. Again, not quite sure what you have to think of this draft class in order to rank it a D, but that's Thor.
He must have hated all of them and given no credit for Cam Ward at the top, but fun to see. All right. Jacksonville Jaguars are next up. They made the power move from number 5 to number 2 overall to get Travis Hunter, gave up a future 1 once again in the draft grades. I have no idea if anyone's going to assess that, the fact that they gave up a future 1 for this pick. So they go Travis Hunter in the first at pick number 2. They double up at corner, or did they? With Caleb Ransaw, cornerback / safety from Tulane with their second pick, which is in round 3. Their third round pick was Wyatt Milam, the guard / tackle out of West Virginia. 2 fourth rounders, Bashal Tutin, the running back out of Virginia Tech, and Jack Kaiser, linebacker out of Notre Dame. And of the day 3 picks, to me most interesting, Jalen McLeod, edge / linebacker coming out of Auburn, kind of an undersized edge in college who's got a little juice. And then Jonah Monheim, the center out of USC, and LaQuint Allen, the running back out of Syracuse, a couple seventh rounders there. So, look, big move at the top. First move James Gladstone really makes in the draft is to trade up for Travis Hunter. What were your thoughts on the Jags draft and in this initial move here by James Gladstone?
Yeah, I mean, a hell of a statement signature move for your kind of first order of business as the new GM. And he had said something like, I've been talking a lot since getting here, because obviously there's nothing to do sort of actual move wise up until the draft. So he'd been doing interviews, he'd been, talking to people, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, it felt good to actually do something. And he sort of said, look, it's an entertainment business. And that is part of this. Like, it does feel like part of this calculus, part of this evaluation for Jacksonville is, how exciting a player is Travis Hunter. What can he bring, not just on the field, but off the field? Kind of the way, forget who it was, but somebody in the Hard Knocks in the Giants debate of whether they keep Saquon Barkley or not was, this guy was the face of the team. Like, what do we do when the face of the team leaves? How do we replace that? I feel like this is part of the Jacksonville thought process, is Travis Hunter can be even more than Trevor Lawrence, like the face of this franchise, this unique two-way player, this sort of social media superstar, this guy who plays both sides of the ball, who's just a fun personality. I think that was part of the evaluation. But as you said, they gave up a future first to make this happen, which is kind of interesting as well, because so much of the potential value in Travis Hunter is this idea that he can be two players in one, or 1.5 players in one. If you give up a future first to make it happen, you kind of offset a lot of that potential value. Like, you've paid 2 players in terms of picks to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was really 3 pretty high level picks. The reason why I love this move for the Browns is because they still got Mason. They got Mason Graham, the high second round pick, which turned into Quinshon Judkins, and a first round pick. So I loved it from the Browns perspective. Of course, there were some later picks exchanged in there as well. But it was one of those, at the time, I said, it still feels like a win-win for me. I mean, look, would I have done that? If I had gotten the Jags job, would I have made this move? I don't think so. I would have been aggressive the other way. I would have been aggressive with more picks. I think both ways are aggressive, right? I mean, the Browns trading down, that's a bold move. Like, giving up Travis Hunter is bold, and going up to get him is bold. And so Mike Renner was on the show Saturday morning, just kind of recapping day 1 or 2. And something I hadn't thought of just yet was not just that the Rams had given up first round picks for 7 straight years while James Gladstone was there, but that they did go full stars and scrubs method, as we used to always term it, right? They were star heavy on that team. And is that what we're going to see here in Jacksonville going forward? Are we going to see some maneuvering to give up high picks to get, say, 5 stars? And if they are going to go that way, we could argue Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., and Travis Hunter. I would say maybe throw Josh Hines-Allen in the mix there. Maybe not superstar, but he's a star. They've got 4 players. They have a foundation here that if they want to add 3 or 4 more over the next couple of years, it might be the way that he wants to go. And then remember, you complement that with, 10 day 3 picks or whatever the Rams have done historically. You kind of trust your day 3 drafting. That's how you fill out the roster. I do wonder if that's the way to go. And this was the first step in that direction to go get Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy with the idea that, he's special, right? You go and chase the blue chip players. There weren't many blue chip players in this draft. You can definitely make the argument that the blue chip players ran out after Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. I think some teams would have drawn the line there. I think some teams might have put Mason Graham in that blue chip category as well. Obviously, Genty and, different positions that are lower down that might not sort of categorize themselves as blue chip. But overall, I think you can definitely make the argument that the Jags might have seen a line drawn between Travis Hunter and what would have been available at 5 that makes it worth trying to achieve that. To me, it's too much of an overpay, though. Like, I love Travis Hunter, but you're just giving up so much to go and get him. I don't think it's worth doing. But even he now, I think, needs to be something of a two-way player to even come close to justifying this. Like, what was interesting about Hunter to me the most is if you just categorized him as a wide receiver, I think he's worth a top 5 draft pick. If you just categorize him as a cornerback, I think he's worth a top 5 draft pick. And then obviously there's the potential of, can you turn him into 1.5 players? And suddenly that's almost an unprecedented level of value in today's NFL. And I'd be cool with that if I already had that draft pick, but I'm not to the point where I'm going to go chasing it, because there's so much unknown in terms of what you're going to get out of him as a two-way player. I don't know if he can play full-time wide receiver and then, 5 snaps a game, or if he can play 20 snaps a game, or if he can play full-time both ways. And by the way, neither does anybody else in the NFL. This is going to be breaking new ground. Like, we're going to be learning this together, what he can achieve based off, some knowledge of what he did in college, et cetera. But the NFL game is different. So there's so much unknown and therefore so much risk attached to all of the two-way stuff that I'm not giving up multiple picks to go and jump a couple of spaces up. If I already had that pick, absolutely take him, and the upside is huge. But I do feel like this was overly risky versus just stay where you are, take Mason Graham, who's close to being a blue chip player anyway, and don't overthink it.
I think they're definitely going to lean into the two-way thing, but he'll be a wide receiver.
Like I said.
Yeah, and they'll be a wide receiver first, as many teams, assumed or at least indicated. The other part too, James Gladstone's very first press conference, he was making statements like, we're going to get the right people in the building, the people that are going to elevate everybody around them. I told you on the live broadcast, I talked to a team who was picking in the teens, and they were like, man, Travis Hunter is awesome. Like, he is the best dude. Everybody's talking about him just as a guy. Forget the two-way player thing. Forget the talent. Like, you just want that guy on the team. That went into this thing too. James Gladstone talking about, we're going to get people in the building that are just going to elevate the atmosphere around us. It sounds touchy-feely, but that was a huge part of this to get. I love looking at a GM's first move, right? It was Dan Campbell getting Penei Sewell. This is James Gladstone getting Travis Hunter, and that's what he's tied to forever. And on the field, I want to talk about that in a second here, but I also think off the field, they're just like, get this guy in the building. We're all going to be better for it. That's part of the reasoning here, right or wrong. But the 1-2 punch of Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter at receiver with Liam Cohen calling plays, I think we're starting to get to a spot where maybe I still think Trevor Lawrence is a really good quarterback. I think after the first year and a half of his career, he's become a good quarterback. Good. Not great, good. Top 10 to 12-ish. He's in that range. Had moments. He had stretches where he was pushing the top 5. This is probably the closest opportunity he has now with an offensive line tied up for the next couple of years. I think they're okay. They're not great. But most importantly, 2 dynamic playmakers in Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. I think they're moving in the right direction to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence now.
Yeah, so, I think the trade was an overpay. I wouldn't have made that move. I think it's too risky. That being said, I absolutely love putting Travis Hunter in this offense alongside Brian Thomas Jr., who I genuinely think has like number 1 superstar potential. We already saw flashes of that as a rookie. As long as they see him the same and they like completely open up the entire playbook and say everything is on the table for this guy, he can be, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. He can be the elite number 1 top 5 receiver in the NFL. I think he's got that kind of upside. And this is coming from someone that didn't think he had any of that really as a draft prospect. I was much lower on him than everybody else, but was so impressed by him as a rookie. Now you add in Travis Hunter, who brings elite quickness, elite ball skills, elite understanding of defenses. And if he had a question at wide receiver, it's, can he be that true number 1, full-time outside threat, the guy that can take any kind of coverage away with the full sort of deep speed. He doesn't need to anymore. Now Brian Thomas Jr. is already that guy, so he can be the complementary piece. He can be the number 2, and he can, I think, immediately step in and be a really high-level version of that. So now you've got Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, De'Ami Brown was signed, Gabe Davis is already there. You've got some weapons there. Like, this is a really fun-looking offense immediately with that combination.
Let's go to the rest of the draft here, though. Brian Dormady says Travis Hunter's YouTube channel, the super chat in here. Travis Hunter's YouTube channel has about 2 million views for his Jags video. So he's elevating the Jags here. The official Jaguars channel has about 100,000. That's what he brings with him. There's
that's
a
what I
business
set up front,
element here.
right?
Yeah.
That's part of this. That's exactly what we said up top. This is not just, I think, a purely football decision. This is he can be the face of the franchise in a way. I mean, really, when was the last time Jacksonville had a guy like that who was legitimately like a league level
Mark
face
Brunell.
superstar? Right.
Mark Brunell.
I mean, you're going back to that kind of era, right? Where the Jags legitimately had a sort of league level face of the league superstar. Travis Hunter definitely does bring that to the table. I really do think that was part of this whole equation. Not only can we go and get a guy who's unique, two-way player, potentially insanely valuable, but let's be honest, he does change the media level, the media sort of baseline of this franchise in a way that's good for everybody, that's good for business. So yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair point.
To just touch on the rest of the draft, the second pick was Caleb Bransaw. He's kind of a cornerback safety hybrid, really athletic, okay production, pretty good tackler at Tulane. Wyatt Milam, the guard from West Virginia, played tackle at West Virginia, struggled a little bit at the Senior Bowl, moving around positions, but I do think he has starting guard potential. I think seventh rounder Jonah Monheim has a future center, maybe starting center potential too. You may have stolen a future starter there in the seventh, give him another year or two. Bashal Tutin adds another, he ran 4.3, low 4.3s. So you're talking about another dynamic threat here on this offense. If nothing else, I think they added not just Travis Hunter as a playmaker, not just Brian Thomas Jr. last year, but another playmaker in Tutin. He's got he's not as efficient down to down, but he's got big playability. Got to cut down on the fumbles just a little bit. And then I mentioned McLeod, the edge / linebacker from Auburn. I would just see if he could rush the passer off the edge. Might be a linebacker conversion, but had a really productive year last year at Auburn. So I didn't love the rest of the draft. Like, there's no player there where like, man, love it, love the fit, love the spot, but just trying to break down what they got here with the rest of the draft.
Yeah, Bashal Tutin is an interesting draft pick. He ended up being, I think, the seventh running back off the board. He went one pick ahead of Cam Scadaboo at the top of the fourth round. He's 5'9", 206, and he is this classic outside zone one-cut runner, like a old school Shanahan system is what he's made for. He runs a 4.3 240, has 95th percentile jumps, like crazy athlete. And again, 5'9", 206, like low to the ground, pretty powerfully built. His two big seasons, like 50% of his yardage was breakaway yardage. Those big plays straight through, one cut, gone. He is very boomer bust as a ball carrier. And he had a fumbling issue in college as well. Had 9 over the last 2 years, but you do love his sort of big playability. So now you add him, like ETN and Bashal Tutin in the same offense, along with those big play threats on the outside. Like, this is an offense that's building like home run hitters across the board. They are not messing around. Everybody on this offense, they are trying to find a guy that can house the ball anytime they touch it. So that's kind of fascinating. And then there another team, they double dipped at the position. They came back, I think, in the 7th round and got LaQuint Allen, the Syracuse running back. He was somebody a lot of people liked, sort of a third down type of back, like a former receiver, or at least a guy with receiving skills. And he could carve a role in this offense as well. So they added a couple of interesting players on day 3.
To go with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, and then adding 2 more running backs. Kind of stocking up on running backs here in Jacksonville. The Renee Bugner's consensus has the Jags at number 10 overall. Not a whole lot of bad grades in there, ranging from A to C- in the consensus GPA from Renee Bugner. Anything else on the Jags?
No, just it's going to be an interesting draft to watch pan out because of the Travis Hunter stuff.
All right, Indianapolis Colts are up next. They start with Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. This was the people were right. This was one of the most common mock draft picks. Tyler Warren to the Colts, fitting a need and about where people expected Warren to go. JT Tuimoloau, the Ohio State edge rusher, JTT in the 2nd round. Justin Wally, the cornerback out of Minnesota in the 3rd. Jalen Travis, the Iowa State tackle in the 4th. DJ Giddens, running back out of Kansas State in the 5th. And then the most significant of the rest of the picks, Riley Leonard, the QB out of Notre Dame in the 6th. Also went defensive tackle Tim Smith from Alabama with a 6th rounder, and Hunter Wohler, the safety out of Wisconsin. What were your thoughts on this Colts draft here, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Tyler Warren in the first round was one of the chalkiest first round picks in mock drafts. It would have been interesting to know, because Colson Loveland went off the board before Tyler Warren, which wasn't something a lot of people had predicted pre-draft. It would be interesting to know if they were both on the board, which one would the Colts have gone for? Obviously, Tyler Warren, I think, is a great fit for them, but I'm curious if they would have had Loveland ranked higher as well, or if it was just other teams that did. Either way, Warren is a need for this offense, a great fit for it as well. Can block, can be a good receiving option as well, can just massively upgrade the tight end spot, which has been a problem for the Colts for a while, and which was the glaring weakness. Now you start to look at the overall collection of skill position players. They've got a lot of weapons. Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs. That's a nice receiving trio. Adonai Mitchell, ridiculous athlete, ridiculous talent. I don't know what he's going to be yet based off his rookie season, which was just confusing, but also non-productive. And then Tyler Warren brings the tight end to the table, Jonathan Taylor, DJ Giddens in the draft as well. This is a really fun group and good group of playmakers to go to work with the quarterback, whether it ends up being Richardson or Daniel Jones.
Yeah, let's stick with this Tyler Warren discussion and then get to the rest of the draft here, because the other element, I think he's a pretty good run blocker. I think he's got the ability to mix it up on the line of scrimmage. And then we saw how Penn State used Tyler Warren, moving him around, using him as an H-back, using him as the direct snap guy. He's a former high school quarterback, lefty thrower too. He's going to have a couple passes in there, and opposing teams have to remember he's lefty. So if you got him rolling left, you got to watch out. But I think he helps the run game as well. And obviously, I think the Colts want Anthony Richardson to develop and have the starting job. But whether it's Richardson or Daniel Jones, they both have running elements to their game. You had their running element next to Jonathan Taylor, one of the better running backs in the NFL. Warren, who does upgrade your run game just a little bit in his versatility. I think you can add some creativity to the offense, and you can also just add a little bit more run game creativity to the offense. So I'm with you. When you just list all those playmakers, they have a little bit of everything. Deep threats, they have possession receivers, they have the A.D. Mitchell wild card, as you mentioned. He could be great, who knows? And then you have Tyler Warren, a guy that, he's big-bodied for today's NFL as far as tight ends go, as far as his size and the way he uses his body up the seam. So, yeah, I think he becomes a dependable target, upgrades your run game a little bit, and makes the Colts a little bit more difficult to defend in the first round. And that's me saying I would have rather taken those tight ends a little bit later in the first round, but with so much uncertainty on both lines of scrimmage and some of the other players there, I get it. I understand.
Tight end hater, Steve.
Tight end hater, Steve. I will say I didn't love the rest of the Colts draft. I thought they were all, okay picks, but JT Tuimoloau, I would have taken a few other edges ahead of him, but he's a dependable, I think, early down run defender type that, grew on you the more you watched him.
Yeah, I mean, I like the pick. The only thing I'm surprised about is that the Bucs didn't take him in their straight down the fairway draft. JTT would have been perfect for safest draft pick you can make type of deal. I do like him. I think his ceiling is limited. I don't think he has superstar potential, but he's a technically sound player. One of the most technically sort of advanced, I think, in this edge rush class. He's powerful. He's a really good run defender. I think it makes a really nice pairing with last year's pick, Latu. I think Latu has significantly higher upside than JTT does, but I think he definitely adds to this rotation and gives them some depth and also some future flexibility with the guys that they have coming up with contracts. So, would I have gone with a different player at that position? Maybe, but I don't have any problem with that. I think it's a perfectly sound, safe draft pick.
Same thing, Justin Wally. You got a 4-year starter from Minnesota, pretty solid player, but just felt more like a day 3 type of player. They got him in round 3 instead. He's got a chance to compete for that starting spot opposite Travarius Ward, who they brought in. You mentioned on the live show, after years of having Gus Bradley and having the super long corners in the old school Seattle cover 3, Wally's a little bit shorter, not as long, under 31-inch arms, and just a different body type here than what the Colts have brought in over the last couple of years. So maybe he competes for time opposite Ward, with Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, and some of the incumbents there on the other side next to Ward, who they spent $18 million a year for. As far as day 3, I thought Jalen Travis at tackle is one of the better, quote, developmental tackles in this draft, moves really well. transferred from Princeton to Iowa State, only 1 year at Iowa State. I think his run blocking, he's like my criticism of Gray Zabel was kind of run blocking angles and just getting to the second level, which I think coaches can fix, right? You can coach that up a little bit. Travis has some similarities, but I think it's about 6'7", moves extremely well. So as far as developmental tackles go, I think he's as good as it gets as far as a day 3 type of prospect.
Yeah, and I like DJ Giddens as a change of pace option as well in that backfield. I mean, he's a home run hitter as well. Didn't love him overall in this draft class, but in the 5th round, I'm absolutely all on board taking a guy like that to back up what they already have in Jonathan Taylor and to provide a kind of change of pace, guy that could come in, bring something a little bit different to the table. And then Riley Leonard, the Notre Dame quarterback, people talked about as literally like a mashup of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. If you threw them both in a meat grinder, it would spit out a version of Riley Leonard at the other end of it. He's a perfect kind of composite of the two of them. And Riley Leonard was weird to me because I wanted to like him. Like I went through his tape, but I was buying what he was selling. I kind of bought into the whole thing. And then you sort of take a step back and look at it at the end of it. And you're like, he just unfortunately isn't that good. Like I want to like the kid. I want to buy in. I want to say yes on Riley Leonard. And yet if you write down everything, you're like, there's just not really that much there at the end of it all.
Yeah, I don't think his feel for the pass game is great. General timing and anything beyond 10 yards in my notes multiple times came up, just felt like a chore. Look, I mean, and then obviously you could always find some good throws in there and things that offset that. There just wasn't enough. But he runs really well. I mean, he was compared to Daniel Jones at Duke as the big quarterback that can run a little bit, right? And he never developed as a passer the same way Daniel Jones did. And I didn't love Jones as a passer coming out either, but Leonard was way behind, I think, Daniel Jones throwing the ball. But he's got that run game ability, and throw him in the developmental quarterback bucket in round 6.
Yeah, and he played reasonably well at the Senior Bowl, which I think stands to his stead. But it's a lot like, remember when Daniel Jones, like early in his career, there was some big plays there, and then they just evaporated, and like Daniel Jones' productivity just ceased to exist, and he wasn't turning the ball over that much, but he just wasn't bringing much to the table. That's kind of what it felt like with Riley Leonard, where it took him like 4 games in to throw a passing touchdown this season. The commentary line when he finally got one was, and finally Riley Leonard has a touchdown pass in a Notre Dame uniform. And this is, Notre Dame national contender, et cetera. Now, to be fair, he had 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns at that point. But still, if you're talking about a quarterback that has NFL ability, you don't want that guy to be taking a month to record a passing touchdown in his college career when he's on a contending, elite level team. You want that guy to be posting a fairly regular output of passing scores and passing production, and he just wasn't. So it did feel a lot like kind of late stage Daniel Jones, where it's like the running threat is there, the passing threat just isn't at the moment, and I don't know if it ever will be.
Hunter Wohler, the other name I'll just throw out there, Wisconsin safety, maybe outside chance to start down the road. 6'2", good size, had a good 3-cone, productive player at Wisconsin for a couple of years. So I don't think it was an exciting draft necessarily. You get a tight end, and you got tight end in round 1. Warren's good, and then JTT for me more like don't love the juice off the edge, and for a second round edge rusher, he could be a dependable player. Like again, like I said, with a lot of teams here, see a path to the field for 3 or 4 of these draft picks, other developmental options, and that's the Colts draft here. The consensus, I thought the consensus. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you were destined to hate this draft from the moment they took a tight end in the first round. So I think you have to adjust your expectations for that. I will say, when you use Arif Hassan's study, you go to his Twitter page, you'll find his Substack, Wide Left is the name of it. He compares all these teams to the consensus value to kind of tot up effectively what value they got with their picks in addition to just the players. It's got the Colts with one of the top 5 most valuable drafts relative to the capital that they expended to take those players. So in at least one way, you can view this as a very good draft from a process standpoint.
I'm surprised that because I figured Warren and JTT were right there. Wally was probably a reach given the consensus board. Where else would they have gained value? I'm surprised by that, to be honest. But that's just
I'm not sure. without seeing it pick by pick.
Sorry.
They don't
That's
have
fine.
anybody within the top 15 sort of individual steals, but
got it.
Collectively the draft scored well.
I'm just surprised by that. The consensus has the Colts at number 22 overall. Even Thor liked it, B+. But yeah, Colts number 22 on Renee's consensus GPA rankings here. Anything else on the Colts?
Nope.
Let's go Houston Texans here. They had an interesting one.
Wait. I misspoke. They are not, in fact, the top 5. They were the top 5 of the level where the page had cut off on my window. They are, in fact, middle of the pack.
Okay. That sounds a little bit more reasonable. I think they got pretty much everybody where they were expected, except maybe Wally right there. Houston Texans. They traded out of the first round, their first second rounder. They have 2 seconds. They go Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, the wide receiver, Ariante Ursary with their second round pick, Minnesota tackle. They go back to the Iowa State receiver well with Jalen Knoll from Iowa State. Jalen Smith from USC is their 3rd round pick. They make a huge trade, give up multiple future picks for Woody Marks from USC, the running back. So back-to-back USC. They only got guys named Jalen and receivers from Iowa State and guys from USC. That was that's
is this the weirdest draft of any team?
The Venn diagram is just Jalen's USC and Iowa State wide receivers. Back in the 6th, Jalen Reed, the Penn State safety, Graham Mertz, the Florida quarterback in the 6th round. The QBs coming off the board left and right in round 6 and 7. And then Keontae Hamilton, Rutgers defensive tackle, and Luke Lachey, the Iowa tight end in the 7th round. So 4 picks in rounds 2 and 3. And I thought they worked the board pretty well by moving off of 25. They picked up an extra 3 and then a 3 next year. And that's, part of what I think to go make the move to get Woody Marks. A lot of maneuvering from Nick Caserio. What were your thoughts on this Texans draft here?
Yeah, fascinating kind of case study for just how much they were going to maneuver the draft and target specific areas or specific players. They came into the draft with a ton of draft picks. They ended up not making a pick in the 5th round at all, right? That's how much sort of moving around they did, or the 1st round. So they traded out of 2 different rounds of this draft and yet had 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks, a ton of 6th and 7th round picks. Just an interesting strategy. And then that's before you get to, double dipping on Iowa State receivers, not taking the tackle help that people thought you needed until pick number 48. Just a really interesting draft from a kind of process standpoint.
The Woody Marks one, they traded one of their 3rd round picks from next year and pick 179 to go get him at pick 116. So they must have seen him obviously valued as a 3rd round pick. So whether it matters or not, they come out of this probably feeling like they got 2 2s and 3 3s. And they would probably tell you when they got Jaden Higgins, they would have taken him at 25, right? He would have been at least in the conversation at 25 in round 1. And they still got him at 34 while picking up those extra picks. So I think that's probably how they're viewing this draft.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with that as a concept. I mean, we were the guys pushing the Jaden Higgins in the 1st round agenda from very early on. We were pairing him with Buffalo. We were pairing him with another team or 2. We didn't, I don't think, pair him with Houston at any point. And it is an interesting fit because Nico Collins is there as their true number 1 sort of star receiver. There's some crossover with Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins stylistically. That's not necessarily a problem having 2 guys that play a similar style like that. But it is interesting that that's the guy they identified as the sort of complement to that offense rather than some of the other receivers that had fallen out of the 1st round. But then to come back and get Jalen Knoll, who we already know those 2 function as a great complement to each other because they were teammates in the same offense. And they do bring a very different skill set to each other. So that is I think it's an awesome duo to add. I mean, they were phenomenal for Iowa State. Now you basically say, well, they're going to go to the same offense in the NFL with CJ Stroud as their quarterback. And by the way, Nico Collins is there as the 3rd. Like that's a phenomenal group to add.
I have to admit, sometimes we're guilty, and we've used the phrase, you want to build a basketball team with the wide receiver core. And we just described the Colts receivers as they all have defined roles, right? Alex Pierce, deep threat, and Michael Pittman, possession, and Josh Downs, possession slot, and whatever AD Mitchell is. But it's okay. You're right. It's like it's okay to have the same skill set. It's okay to put the defense in a bind and say, look, we have two big receivers who move well, get open, especially Nico, who's looking like a future star now. Like he's developed into top 5. Like this isn't wild, like top 5 to 7 or whatever wide receiver potential for Nico Collins if he keeps that up. And then you have Jaden Higgins on the other side. That puts the defense in a bind in a whole different way. But I am so glad that they complemented them with Jalen Knoll, who I think can play in the slot, can also line up outside, also take advantage of the tight splits, right? We've got a Rams-centric scheme here coming over for Houston this year, and they use a lot of tight splits for the receivers. I think that's where Knoll really works extremely well, and you've got him and his 4.39 speed, ball skills down the field, continues to progress and get better. So you have that deep threat. You have Higgins, and Nico's a deep threat in his own right. Higgins on the outside. Hopefully they could get Tank Dell back at some point, but clearly they're saying, hey, we can't completely count on him being injured 2 straight years. And for whatever it's worth, 1 year of Christian Kirk, getting him from the Jags. So I love the way they're building this receiving core in Houston.
Well, Jalen Knoll is kind of like a mashup of Christian Kirk and Tank Dell. Like skill set wise, there's a lot of crossover with each of those guys who are slightly different. But he obviously can fit that role for them, can potentially become a version of both those guys. Christian Kirk probably isn't there long term. Tank Dell, I think they've shown the approach that I was sort of saying throughout the offseason that, look, everybody wants Tank Dell to come back healthy and be the guy that he looked like he would be for them. But with that injury that he suffered, the second one in particular, like the fact that he's had back-to-back is its own concern or red flag, but the manner of the second injury, like that injury was so severe that they basically can't rely on him at this point. They would love to get him back healthy, but they're also smart enough to know you shouldn't make that bet. If you're the Houston Texans, you should bring in an insurance policy, a contingency plan, so that in case he comes back and he's a different guy than he was before he got hurt, it doesn't sink you or it doesn't drag you down. So that, I think, is clearly the approach they've taken with Jalen Knoll. And yeah, look, I really like those additions. And then we get to Arante Ursary, the Minnesota offensive tackle. This is a team that needed offensive tackle competition at the minimum. Cam Robinson signed as a short-term answer at left tackle. Blake Fisher, last year's second-round draft pick at right tackle. Didn't have a great rookie year, but we'll see what he can bring. They've got Trent Brown as contingency at the right side. They might not have an offensive tackle long-term, right, between the two sides. So Ursary coming in as a developmental guy to try and win one of those two spots and to provide some competition is a good move, and I think it's good value where they got him as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it on day 2 when they made this move. Back-to-back years with second-round tackles. So at worst, I think, Cam Robinson's the starting left tackle for 1 year, and now it's Blake Fisher competing with Trent Brown and Ursary, as you mentioned. I think Ursary is kind of like Josh Simmons for me. I think he's a tackle only, or I think teams are going to look at him as a tackle. So I don't know if he's going to, have an opportunity to play guard. Have they done enough on the offensive line? You've made the point. Maybe they didn't need 4 new starters. Maybe it was Bobby, the old O-line coach. It was a lot of the mental part of the game as much as the physical, and where they were really falling short last year, struggling with stunts and blitz pickups and everything last year. Titus Howard at guard, Jarrett Patterson likely at center, Juice Scruggs at the other guard position. And as far as backups, they brought in Ed Ingram. Hasn't had the most productive career, but he's, as a backup, fine. Laken Tomlinson is also on the roster as well. So there's some depth there. I'm saying Tomlinson, I might be living in 5 years ago, but he's been a productive player throughout his career. He might just be past his prime, but if he had to step in as a starter, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Did that sound bad?
Yeah.
And then 3 players competing at right tackle. So they have attacked this in volume, Sam, including some of the incumbents there. There was a part of me that wouldn't have been surprised if they used 4 picks on offensive linemen and said, we're really going after it, but I don't question them not doing that because I see the potential pieces, and I love what they did at receiver, and I love what they did trading out of the first round to help get those extra picks.
Yeah, I mean, we saw last year, right? Like this offensive line could easily be garbage. On the other hand, I do think it could be put back together pretty quickly. Cam Robinson is average to below average. to above average, depending on the season. At left tackle, I think Titus Howard can be a capable left guard. Patterson, Juice Scruggs is a center right guard. They're both young. They've both shown average play at times. And then Blake Fisher, Trent Brown on the right side. Like, it could easily be 5 average guys, which would fulfill our mantra of creep back toward average. But when you're dealing with 5 average to below average to above average players, there's always the chance that those guys don't play at their baseline level, and suddenly your offensive line is just a train wreck. So, and that was basically what it was a year ago.
Everything else, pretty much a depth piece here because of where Houston is. And look, this affects perception too, right? When we talk about bad teams, we're like, look at this 5th rounder, look at this 6th rounder, he's going to go play. Not so much with Houston because they've created such great depth. Defensive line depth, secondary started, all the starters are locked in pretty much, but everything else is a depth piece. Jalen Smith as a slot safety kind of hybrid, mostly a slot receiver there. Jalen Reed from Penn State at safety. Woody Marks, I think, you add some quickness to the running back room. Maybe he competes for some running back 2 snaps behind Joe Mixon. Graham Mertz is the quarterback I said is just going to lurk around the league for 8 to 10 years as kind of a QB3. He did, continue to answer the call at Florida before getting hurt last year. And if he could just cut down on the sacks, he is pretty accurate, can make some plays, not a bad 6th round quarterback there. And I also thought Luke Lachey at tight end for Iowa, I thought there was a point in his career where he's going to ascend into one of the top tight end prospects. Didn't necessarily happen, but he's got some ball skills at the catch point and, good guy to get into the building. So I think from round after Jalen Knoll, everybody else is, fighting for, 2nd and 3rd on the depth chart, but a couple positions where, they could add some depth.
Yeah, Woody Marks is interesting, though, because I think he has a pathway to being the 3rd down back. I think that's the role they've identified for him. What's interesting there is that he was the player, not only that they identified as that, but that they, passionately went after aggressively with the draft picks that they had. So when he came off the board, there were Dylan Sampson was still on the board for one. Jordan James would be an interesting name. DJ Giddens, who we talked about before. Jaden Blue, who's more of that receiving threat, 3rd down back type of player as well.
Scatterboo was still on the board.
Yeah, though a very different type of player. No, Scatterboo had already gone.
Oh, that was in the 4th?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was okay. You're right. Scatterboo had gone 10 picks earlier. Maybe that's what.
Damian Martinez was still on the board, but specifically in terms of those sort of 3rd down back types, like Rashad Smith from SMU was still on the board. LaQuint Allen was a guy that went lower. Like, these types of players are all in that type of role, and they identified Woody Marks as the guy to go after and really targeted him.
All right, consensus for the Houston Texans. Where are they? Where did they go? Middle of the pack, right? Oh, 21. A little bit lower than I had anticipated. Texans are 21, ranging from an A- to Thor's D+. You must have hated Higgins.
I kind of want to see this, when you throw out the score of the East German judge. Like, if we lop off the top and the bottom, like, where do we get to in terms of some of these teams?
Texans jump up to 10 if you take Thor out of the equation here. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good process-wise. I do wonder if people, because they anticipated, like me, maybe 3 offensive line picks because of the way the value went, if they were just saying, oh, we know how bad their offensive line was, they didn't address those needs. Again, I don't know how everybody's grading, but it's interesting to see the whole composite. I probably would have liked this one a little bit higher than I would say the consensus. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, got to tell you about our friends over at Skims. I had heard of Skims before, but was surprised to find out they were now offering men's underwear. And I'm excited that they are, because we're here to tell you they're worth the hype, Sam. They are worth the hype. I usually don't like, trying to figure out which underwear, I have to choose from. They never fit right, hard to find something comfortable, maybe in my own size. But they're comfortable, they're practical. Skims is the way to go. Waistband's never too tight, feel great. So I'm all in on Skims. They offer 2 types of boxer briefs for men. You've got the cotton or the stretch. Cotton is designed for day-to-day use. Stretch is built for athletic performance. And so I'm more of a day-to-day guy. I'm in on the cotton right now. Cotton boxer brief from Skims is my go-to. That's where I'm at here, Sam. Do you agree or disagree?
I do. I think they are extremely fine sets of underwear that are currently the favorite pair that I own. I think they're high-level items. High level.
So you can shop Skims Men at skims.com and Skims stores. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, here's what you got to do. You got to select podcast. I'm going to go in and actually just buy like 10 and say it's all from Check the Mic. But you select podcast in the survey, select our show, Check the Mic in the drop down that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, USA Basketball, and of course, Check the Mic. So skims.com/CTM. You see that right on the screen there as well. Be sure to give us credit. We get all the credit. Skims.com/CTM. That's how we get credit. Go check it out right now at Skims.
Now, you see, Walt's in here slandering the good people at Skims, saying Skims waistbands roll up. Discuss. That's absolutely not the case. Based off personal experience of the Skims boxer briefs, the waistbands do not roll up.
There's no way. You tell me, maybe did Walt already make a purchase here? I don't think so. I doubt it.
Just saying, that's just a flat out lie, and I'm not going to stand for that.
Put him in timeout in the chat. We can't have you cannot attack our sponsors here, the official underwear provider of Check the Mic. You cannot attack us. All right, let's go NFC South here. We are 87.5% of the way through the league here. We've got one division to go. Carolina Panthers, Dr. Eric Eager's first draft. They start with Tedero McMillan, wide receiver.
Here we go.
At number 8. Let's criticize the doctor. Tedero McMillan at number 8 overall. It's really Dan Morgan's first full draft by himself, isn't it? Nick Scorton, Texas A&M edge. Princely Umanmielen, Ole Miss edge. Those were their second and third round picks. They had 2 4s, Trevor Etienne, the running back out of Georgia, Lathan Ransom, the safety out of Ohio State, Cam Jackson in the 5th, Florida defensive tackle, 350-pounder, Mitchell Evans, Notre Dame tight end, and then Jimmy Horn Jr. in the 6th, Colorado wide receiver. Dan Morgan's second draft, is that right? Eric's first? Losing track here. Anyway, your thoughts on the Carolina Panthers draft?
I liked it. I thought this was a good draft. We've seen the images, right? And there's media that's being put out there. We've got the doctor positioning himself right behind Dan Campbell when the calls get made to the players. Dan Morgan. I saw the draft room set up. Eric's desk sitting right behind the top decision makers as well. He's positioned right in the thick of it, helping to make the calls.
So Curt Schilling, former Red Sox, Diamondback, Phillies pitcher, famous pitcher. My friends around pro baseball who played with Curt Schilling, they used to call him Red Light Curt. In other words, when the red light was on, when the camera was there, he always found a way to sneak into the camera. I think that's Red Light Eric, right? He just found a way. Oh, Dan's on the phone with the draft pick, and he's just like, lurking around behind him. Red Light Eric, always on camra, finding that.
With
TV
the seating
time.
assignments, I mean, these things are done hierarchically, right? Like you don't have a plum seat if you're not a big decision maker in the organization. He's sitting there right behind the key guys, the Dan Morgans of the world. He's right there. So this draft, I'm sure, has some legitimate Dr. Eric Eager fingerprints all over.
I think it absolutely does. So here's what's interesting to me is obviously we spent a lot of time on Mock Draft Mondays talking about defense for the Panthers. They have one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL. And honestly, I don't think they solved it during free agency. I thought they missed out on Milton Williams. They were in late on Milton Williams and getting Travell Wharton and Patrick Jones from Minnesota. Like, I don't think and Bobby Brown, like those were the 3 big moves they made. I don't think they solved their pass rush. So we were linking them with edge rushers the entire time. We were also struggling with those edge rushers. Like, do we really want Jalen Walker? Do we really want a Shamar Stewart? Do we really want Mike Green this high? Or would they even take him this high? So we struggled with it. And I thought this was an excellent pick to not force defense because I personally on my board, I would have Tedero and McMillan. I would have been thrilled to take him in the top 10. Honestly, there's a world we talked about the Jags. If they had kept those other picks and kept McMillan at 5, would they have been better off? I mean, that's a fair question. I'm good with McMillan at 8 as a weapon for Bryce Young. We'll talk about that more specifically in a minute. But then to turn around, and I think, was it 2 trades up to get Scorton and Princely Umanmielen? It is rare that this happens, Sam. But to get the edge rushers in the 2nd and 3rd, who I think could have been fringe first rounders in normal years, but such a deep edge rush class, Scorton and Umanmielen, 2 completely different types of players, but just some pass rush ability off the edge here for the Panthers. So going receiver and then edge where normally you have to get your edge rushers in the top of the first round and you get your receivers in the second and third. But I think this worked out well for Carolina. McMillan, Scorton, and Uman-Mielen, they have to be thrilled with those first 3 picks, and I love the way they maneuvered to do it.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't love Tetairoa McMillan as much as some other people do. I would have preferred him sort of further down, maybe the second half of the first round instead of the first half. And in an abstract big board, I would have had him lower down. But a large part of that is sort of ranking a lot of these edge rushers above him, who all had various question marks, right? And in particular, a guy like Mike Green, whose big question mark is like sexual assault accusations, right? If you're taking him out of the equation, well, suddenly you start pushing McMillan, step by step, you're pushing him higher and higher up the draft board. And receiver is still a need, or was still a need heading into this draft for the Panthers, because Xavier Legette did not do much year one, because Adam Thielen is reaching the end of his impressive career, because Jalen Coker was a surprise breakout star as a rookie, but we don't know if he's going to continue that into year 2. So absolutely going and identifying, one of the best receivers in this draft and bringing him in is a great idea, particularly if you don't love the risks associated with this edge rusher group in the first round. And then to come back and address that edge rusher need in the second and the third, I think is really good. Nick Scorton has got big time potential. Like, it was a weird career for him because he's another one of those guys who suffered the going to Texas A&M and watching your career tank deal that we talked about yesterday or the day before. Scorton's tape at Purdue, really impressive. And his body type at Purdue, much more impressive. Then he goes to Texas A&M, tries to play at like 280 pounds, and it just didn't look as good, nearly as good. But I think if you're comfortable, you can get him in a professional building, get him on the right, nutrition, strength and conditioning program. He's got juice. He's got a great inside spin move. He's powerful. He's got great hustle. Like, he can be a really good player and a starter for this defense right off the bat. And then Princely Uman-Mielen in the third round, he's got the edge rush ability, right? He's got the bend, the dip around the outside, the sort of pass rushing juice to bring to the table. And maybe he's got some other things that he needs to work through, but love those two guys as, we didn't take a pass rusher in the first round. We weren't comfortable with that. We went with Tetairoa McMillan. Apparently he doesn't like Tet, and I keep calling him Tet. Apparently Tetairoa McMillan in the first round, and then to come back and get Scorton and Uman-Mielen in the third round, I love that process overall.
And I mentioned earlier, Uman-Mielen, completely different type of rusher. He's in the designated pass rush type for me. Scorton he's hard edge setter in the run game. I think he's more of a 3-down type of player. Even if Uman-Mielen is just a designated pass rush type, I thought that would have been fine value in the second. They get him in the third. He's got legitimate juice off the edge. I thought his workout would match that a little bit more. It didn't, but it shows up on the field, man. I mean, I think it was Ben Solak had a couple play breakdown on ESPN breaking down him putting Georgia's tackle in a blender throughout a game. Like, go watch the Georgia game for Uman-Mielen. Because that's what really pops to me watching the film. I mean, he threatens the edge. I think the Panthers are going to lead the league. You're going to love this. They're going to lead the league in spin moves from edge rushers because Scorton uses it. He got Will Campbell twice with his spin move. And in my notes, Uman-Mielen is a serial spin move user. And I know you used to have a theory that it always works. Well, I've got proof. Uman-Mielen overuses that thing. So it doesn't always work. But so there's going to be a lot of spin moves here. But look, I love the different style pass rushers that they got.
Yeah.
And I think, and plus Scorton, for a guy that's had weight fluctuations and is like more of a power player, he's only 20 years old. It doesn't like fit how your mind works. Like the 20-year-old, usually you expect him to gain 20 pounds in the next couple of years and put weight on. Scorton's been all over the place, but he's still young. So he's productive as a 19-year-old in the Big Ten. Like, that's a lot going for you when you're projecting these players. So adding those two guys to the mix with the other moves they made on the defensive line, which, like I said, they're not flashy and I don't think they turned around the defense, but when you combine free agency with these two draft picks, I think they have a chance to have a much better defensive front. Plus, Derek Brown coming back off the injury, so I think the Panthers look far more formidable up front, certainly than they played last year, just from these couple picks.
I had the same note about the Georgia game in my notes for Uman-Mielen. Absolutely annihilated those Georgia tackles in that game.
And then in the fourth round, Trevor Etienne has some juice at running back, so you throw him into the mix. There's a little bit of Jonathan Brooks insurance. That poor guy, injured, coming off of injury last year. Chuba Hubbard's locked up over the next couple of years. They also brought in Rico Dowdle. So you're talking about, some depth at the running back position, which Dave Canales talked about in interviews. The ability to have that 1-2 punch at running back is really valuable to him, and they've got even more depth there. Lathan Ransom, maybe as a box safety type here, added to the mix. And then Cam Jackson, he's the other one to really highlight. I've said throughout this process, not a lot of 330-plus pounders in this in most drafts, but this draft in particular had a bunch of these guys, and Jackson's 350. He was the small guy on the Florida defensive line because of Desmond Watson being 460. And they rarely got to play together, if ever. But Cam Jackson has that 2-down run plugger type of ability as well. Maybe he eventually takes over Shai Tuttle's role as the pure nose tackle there. They've got Bobby Brown in there competing for it, but I think Jackson has a chance to just get into the rotation as well. So that's not bad as far as the 5th round goes.
And then Jimmy Horn in the 6th round, I think, is a sneaky pick that could make a significant contribution to this offense. We're going to be focused on Teteroa McMillan and what he can do. And obviously Xavier Leggett, his potential is up in the air, but I think he's going to be, if he works out and becomes the player that they thought he was when he was a 1st-round pick, all the better. But even if he just becomes their kind of designated deep threat, X receiver threatening on the outside, vertical option, I think that makes perfect sense. But I think Jimmy Horn is going to push for playing time in this team. He can do a little bit of everything. He can line up in the slot. He can go vertical. He can go horizontal. They're going to be sort of transitioning, into a post Adam Thielen world. Hunter Renfrow was just re-signed as fresh off selling insurance or whatever he was doing as a post NFL career. So they've got some interesting options as slot players now as well. But I think Jimmy Horn's going to carve himself a role in this team.
Yeah, we talked about the McMillan fit. We said a lot that night. He takes a lot of pressure off Xavier Leggett. Leggett can be more of the deep threat. McMillan, I think, is the high volume guy. They've got one more year of Adam Thielen. And then, there's a competition. David Moore continues to produce with Dave Canales, whether it's in Seattle, Tampa Bay, or in Carolina. But I don't think anybody wants David Moore getting too many targets over there. So Jimmy Horn Jr. has a chance to probably compete with Jalen Coker, last year's UDFA. And they've added a lot of depth to that receiving core in Carolina. So, look, I like the draft a lot because I think they got, particularly at the top, 3 good players at the top, good value for all of them. And I like that there was, even though they traded up for the edge rushers, there was a certain patience about it and not forcing a defensive player just because of what they saw off the field. And I also think you're going to see the payout of McMillan. I'm higher on him than you are, but I think he's going to be a good NFL receiver for Bryce Young. And man, Bryce Young was so good down the stretch. Every single week we were cautiously optimistic. Will he keep it up? Will he keep it up? And for the most part, he did. He was outstanding after returning to the starting lineup. And so I think there's the Panthers should be pretty excited about this year to see what they can do.
And we also have to give him a shout out because as an undrafted free agent, they signed Maz Mwansa, one of the IPP guys that we talked about as a real sleeper. He was Dane's 45th ranked edge rusher or something, which, as a guy who basically took up the game a few months ago, just an absolute, we have an individual video about him somewhere in this YouTube channel, but go look him up. Guy that basically just rocked up to his university sports day, ran a 500 meters, and they're like, you need to play a sport, we need to find something for you to do. And now he's in the NFL and could easily become the Panthers IPP practice squad space this year and learn how to play, whether it's off the ball, linebacker, edge, hybrid role, whatever it is. Just a fascinating player to add for training camp and then potentially learn through the season.
All right, Panthers finish at tied for 11th with the Bucs, actually, in the NFC South. Tied for 11th in Renee Brugner's consensus here. An A+ from our old friends at PFF, all the way down to a C. And pretty good haul, I thought, for the Panthers, and like the way they worked the board in that one. All right, man, a couple more teams here through the NFC South. New Orleans Saints, a fascinating one in New Orleans. They kick it off with Kelvin Banks at number 9 overall, the offensive tackle out of Texas. And the rumors were true. They were targeting a second-round quarterback. It's Tyler Shuck, the QB out of Louisville. So the 26-year-old drafted in round 2 For the Saints, Vernon Broughton from Texas, defensive tackle in round 3. They go Jonas Sanker from Virginia, the safety, with their second third-round pick. Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma, linebacker in round 4. Quincy Riley, the cornerback out of Louisville, with their second fourth-rounder. And then other interesting picks include Devin Neal from Kansas in round 6, the running back, and then Fadil Diggs from Syracuse, 7th-round edge rusher. Your thoughts on this Saints draft, Sam?
Yeah, interesting draft. It feels a little bit, I guess, unexciting, but I think it's good. Like Kelvin Banks in the first round made a ton of sense. Offensive linemen generally in this draft were going higher than the projections were at the top of the draft, certainly in the first round. So Kelvin Banks at number 9 makes sense to me. Not forcing a quarterback at 9 makes sense to me, especially given the slide from Shedeur Sanders, given the fact that Jackson Dart was the next one off the board. Tyler Shook in the second round. Look, identifying him as the quarterback, I understand it. It's not the one I would have gone with, but I get it. Like after you got through Cam Ward, it was kind of chaos in terms of the quarterback evaluation. I think a lot of the Shedeur evaluation was not based on his on the field stuff. Tyler Shook. So he's interesting because weird backstory, incredibly long career. So much of it was derailed by injuries. The injuries were strange in and of themselves, like random broken bones, including ones where his leg just kind of buckled under him. So he's been in college a long time, is not actually that experienced in terms of playing time. The style that he plays with is very throwbacky. It's not the way a lot of these modern quarterbacks are playing. It looks more like a quarterback from 20 years ago. And I think some coaches will gravitate towards that. Same with the sort of offense. Stylistically, it's more like those old offenses. And then, of course, you've got that giant red flag of he's literally the architect of maybe the single worst play I've ever seen from a quarterback, where he panics like somebody who's never played the game before, an underhand hot potato throws the ball away rather than taking a hit. And look, everyone has bad plays in there, but I think it's important to underline the difference between that play and like Will Levis, right? Almost every other quarterback's horrific, terrible, bad plays are trying to make a play that isn't there to be made. That play was different because it was genuinely like, I want to just get rid of this ball from my hands rather than be hit with while I'm holding it, and just underarm pitched it away. Like, it was so crazy that when it was posted on Twitter, JT O'Sullivan didn't believe it was real. Like he genuinely thought that it was like CGI or AI had manufactured. Like he could not believe that that was a real play that an NFL prospect made. And I think that's different from anything else you're going to see.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on that one play. It's alarming, but there's other plays on film. He does a little bit of chuck and duck. In my notes, I wrote he's got that downfield aggressive. He's downfield aggressive for better or for worse. Obviously, that play was different, but he's aggressive down the field for better or for worse. But I also wrote he's got this gunslinger creativity. Like he back shouldered a post route one time. You don't usually throw a back. You don't always see quarterbacks back shoulder it on a traditional post. Usually just don't throw it. But he's got some creativity to it if it's covered like that, is what I'm saying. So he's got some creativity to him. So there's some boom or bust. I was also shocked at how well and how often he threw rolling to his left. There's the Notre Dame touchdown in the red zone. There's another play against Virginia where he puts it. I tweeted out a few days ago, or retweeted. Puts it on his receiver's hands at the back of the end zone while rolling left. You don't always get that from a right-handed quarterback. So he's got some tools to work with. Yeah. The age thing, I think, can be overblown because you have to weigh it a couple different ways. He just had this really nice year in the ACC at Louisville at the age of 25. He turned 25 during the season. That was his only real good year. That was it out of 7 years in college. So you have to weigh that. And then the other part, it's not like, oh, he's 25, so you're not going to get 15 years out of him. He'll be too old. Like, that part's okay. So I don't think the age works against him as far as that goes.
No, I mean, I'm far more concerned by the reason he was a 25-year-old breakout than the fact that he was a 25-year-old breakout. Like, I'm concerned by the fact that he had multiple sort of significant bone-breaking injuries randomly. Then that feels like a bigger red flag than the fact that he's 25 now. And look, the ridiculous play that I talked about before, it it's so bad that if it was just that on its own, I would be already concerned. But I think for him in particular, it is indicative of a certain pattern of behavior under pressure that is also troubling. Like you mentioned those chuck and duck plays. I think generally speaking, he does not look at all comfortable under pressure. He looks big picture wise, right? Everyone is always going to have individual plays here or there where they play well, they play badly under pressure. But overall, I think he has quite a troubling trend of sort of panicked play under pressure or very uncomfortable looking under pressure. So the way that Kirk Cousins had this for a long time, and this is not always a permanent thing. I think generally you tend to stay one way or the other in terms of how you relate to pressure. But early in Kirk Cousins' career, he had a lot of panicked plays under pressure. And actually the last few years when he was with Kevin O'Connell, he turned that around a bit and actually started to play a lot better under pressure and would stare down the barrel of the gun and make a play knowing he was going to take a hit and all those kinds of things. Right now, I think Tyler Shuck has a troubling relationship with pressure and does not have, some of the skills that would offset that. That would be a concern for a guy that I'm sort of identifying as a potential future starter and getting in the second round.
So the Saints take him at pick 40. We know Derek Carr dealing with an offseason shoulder injury. Not sure what his status will be for the year, but there's a path to the field, obviously. Shuck potentially playing this season. The Kelvin Banks move, I thought, it marks the second straight year now that the Saints have drafted a tackle in the first round. Last year was Talise Fuanga. I don't know. So there's a world where Trevor Penning is still back this year as the starting right tackle. They did not pick up his fifth-year option, but that's for 2026. He still has one more year with the Saints. So Penning could still start at right tackle. Fuanga started at left tackle last year. Banks could just start at left guard this year, or they could think about Banks just playing his natural left tackle spot everywhere where he played at Texas and moving Fuanga back to right tackle where he played in college at Oregon State and then trading Trevor Penning. So there's some flexibility there, but I think either way, whether it's this year or next, Banks is a future starting tackle, whether it's the left or right side here for the Saints. And there was a point in the draft where he was the consensus number 2 tackle before Amon Membu surpassed him in the consensus and on the draft board. But I think Banks is a reasonable starter at tackle. So that was a good pick, I think, at 9. Vernon Broughton for Texas, another, we talked about the year 7 breakout for the quarterback, but Broughton's more of a year 5 breakout for Texas. They've had a loaded defensive tackle group these last couple of years. Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins went in the second round. Broughton, though, was really productive. It just took 5 years for him to actually start, but like one of the higher graded defensive tackles in the nation last year at Texas. I think he's got some pass rush ability, but again, he does it at 23 years old, and how much does that matter? Danny Stutzman, I think, has some ability against the run as a linebacker. Worry about some of the stiffness and coverage for him. I thought Quincy Riley at corner is a really good depth play for a team that, I think did a nice job at free agency, shoring up the starting spots at corner. But I think he can compete for some starter snaps. He's feisty, could probably play inside and outside. So I think there's a path for him to get to the field. So again, I didn't love a lot of the players up and down the board, but like other teams, Riley in the 4th has a path to the field. Devin Neal, I loved his quickness in short areas as a running back. There's opportunities for a bunch of these guys.
Yeah, Quincy Riley, some of the day 3 picks I really like. Quincy Riley, Devin Neal, the running back from Kansas, and then Fadil Diggs, the Syracuse edge rusher. Those 3 guys, I think, slipped further than I was expecting them to, and to pick all 3 of them up, I think, is a nice move. Diggs, again, we're back on board with this. I'm buying all the propaganda. Former Texas A&M, where he was not good and then immediately left and looked better. So I'm buying that last year's version of him, the Syracuse version, is the player you're going to get going forward. And I think for a 7th round pick, that's a steal.
Consensus did not love the Saints. They have them at 28th overall as far as GPAs go. Nobody higher than a B, it seems. I know there's 1 A-, a whole bunch of Bs, but there was a lot of consistent Cs and a couple Ds in there. So people didn't love the Saints. I wonder if that's just QB, if it's, as you mentioned, it feels unexciting. But there's some solid football players from round 3 on, as we've talked about.
Yeah, in terms of value relative to the consensus board, Arif's work didn't love them either. Didn't hate them, but they were like 10 from the bottom of the value picks.
All right, man. Anything else on the Saints here?
Nope.
Atlanta Falcons. I kind of want to save them for the end. There's so much to talk about with the Falcons. We got the Falcons and the Bucs remaining. Atlanta Falcons, man, they make waves. They go Jalen Walker in the first round, the edge rusher / linebacker out of Georgia. And then they trade back into the first round, give up a future one to get James Pierce Jr., the edge out of Tennessee at pick 26. Next pick is in the third round toward the end. Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, the safety. They go Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma, another safety in round 4. And then Wisconsin offensive tackle Jack Nelson in the 5th. So only 5 selections here for the Falcons. And they gave up next year's first round pick. Your thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons?
I mean, wildly fascinating draft and wildly fascinating process because, they end up, big picture, they end up coming out of the first round with both Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. I mean, I don't think there was any scenario where anybody thought that was possible for any team. And to achieve that is pretty impressive. Now, obviously, in order to make that happen, you have to give up next year's first round draft pick. So it's a little bit like, Houston a couple of years ago where they were like, well, we also want Will Anderson Jr. Let's go trade for him and let's give away next year's first round draft pick. Now, the difference is obviously when the Houston Texans did that, they had drafted a quarterback first. When the Falcons did it, they had drafted another edge rusher already. It's like, it's one thing to be like, well, we want to get greedy and we want this guy too. But the first guy we took is a different player at a different position addressing a different need. It's another thing entirely to be like, well, we already kind of addressed this spot with the first pick, but we really like this guy. So let's go get him again and give up next year's first to do it. So the Falcons over the last few years now are just giving us a whole world of like unique case studies, which is fascinating to me.
The Michael Penix Jr. draft him when you already have Kirk Cousins case study. And now let's see 2 edge rushers. This is what it is for me. And we'll go back into the why and what they have. But Jalen Walker described as the pristine citizen, got to have this guy on the team, unbelievable character. The players who had their character raved about during this process include him, Jalen Milroe, Emeka Ibuka. So they add Jalen Walker, who's only rushed the passer about 300-something times, has shown flashes, but there's some projectability to his game. And then there's James Pierce Jr., who I would say unbelievable pass rush win rate. So I would say he's been productive in college, high pass rush grade from PFF. Maybe doesn't finish plays great, but has the character concerns, football character concerns, doesn't love the game, doesn't pay attention enough, doesn't care, whatever it might be. And now they play the same position and they're in the same room and they're both first rounders. And obviously the Falcons, like, to go make that move for Pierce, you have to assume they loved him enough at 15. And my theory was Jalen Walker had been mocked so many times to Carolina at 8, maybe the Saints at 9, maybe the Niners at 11, and he keeps dropping. And I wonder if the Falcons were just like, man, Walker, we weren't expecting Jalen Walker to be here. Let's get him. And then we have such an edge rush need, right? They traded a 3. Why did they not have picks? They traded a 3 for Matthew Judon before last year, and Judon did absolutely nothing. They still had one of the worst pass rushes last year. And so they had such a need. They said, let's double up. Let's double up on it. So the most fascinating things to me coming out of this is doubling up at edge, but then the 2-year haul of Jalen Walker, James Pierce, and last year's Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorless, throw Rook Aroraro at defensive tackle in there. That's 5 pretty significant draft picks on defensive linemen for a team that needs to rush the passer better, 4 on the edge. And so if they don't do it this year, man, I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be fascinating to see the Falcons and their aggressiveness here.
It is. And part of this is like, what exactly was the thought process and the process generally with this? I kind of agree that I think that they didn't really expect Jalen Walker to be there at 15, that, he was the chalky pick at Carolina at number 8, a bunch of picks before. So I think there's definitely a plausible idea that they just hadn't really. Now, look, teams game all this out. They run mock drafts. They run different scenarios. It had to have crossed their mind, but I don't think they really thought it was likely that he would be available. And it probably changed who they were planning on picking at that spot. So you bring in Jalen Walker, fascinating college prospect, very low in experience, was a true hybrid player where he was playing off the ball linebacker and edge rusher. I think he's best as an edge rusher. I think if you make him a full-time edge and just let him cook, he'll be really good, despite the fact that he's a little bit undersized. he's not a prototype size and he's low on experience. He's powerful. He's got moves. He's got bend. He's got the pass rushing chops. I think that's a good first round draft pick. Then you get, well, how do we get from there to coming back into the first round for James Pierce Jr. and coughing up next year's first to make it happen, as well as some other bits and pieces in that trade? That's where it gets really interesting to me, because in order to justify that, you have to basically say that you value James Pierce Jr. at the same kind of range that you took Jalen Walker at, right? You have to basically say we were prepared to take James Pierce there, but because Walker was there, we decided he was better, took him, but we still think James Pierce is worth that 15 spot. And so once we get to like pick 25, 26, like now we think this is actually good value and we have to go and make the trade back in order to make it happen. So I think it says how good they think James Pierce Jr. is, which is also interesting because of the off-field concerns that people had about James Pierce. And when I say off-field, it's work ethic. It's, is he going to put 100% of himself into being a professional NFL football player, right? Or is he going to, skip out on meetings? Is he going to skip out on work? Is he going to understand the playbook fully in terms of learning it, right? Can you keep him together, basically, right? Can you keep him together to get the football player on the field? Because that guy is awesome. I think that's the one element where I agree with them. And I was sort of saying at some point, you shouldn't overthink James Pierce, right? At some point, you should say he has been exceptionally productive, even with all of these concerns. The dude has been one of the most productive pass rushers, not just in this draft, but in the last few drafts. And we shouldn't overlook that, right? Now, I don't know if I would have said, let's not overlook it. Let's go trade next year's first. And let's value him that high. But when we were thinking about him as a guy who could fall out of the first round, I was like, look, he's still a first round player, independent of the off-field concerns. I would still draft that guy in the first round sometime because he's been so productive. They took that to a whole new level and said, we're not just still drafting him, but we're still valuing him as like a top half of the first round player.
And that's why I say, as a case study, I would make the argument right now, James Pierce is a better edge rusher than Jalen Walker. I would say, PFF grades, which I think translate pretty well as far as pass rushers go. Jalen Walker pass rush grade 83 and 86 over the last 2 years. James Pierce 91 and 89. Again, the question for you is, or for us, is maybe finishing or, some of the plays, letting quarterbacks break contain, where Walker is fantastic. Another fun case study. But Pierce, as far as winning one-on-ones, which I think is more difficult, he's the guy, man. He was thought of as a top 10 caliber player, maybe top 1 caliber player. His movement skills are out of this world. So they're different style players, and the perception around the league was probably different trajectories, where maybe Pierce isn't going to reach that potential, but Walker has the character, football character, and everything to reach it. So now they get them both in the same building, and if they both hit, it is a home run. They're swinging for a grand slam here, Sam, if you know your baseball. In addition to when teams do this, they moved up 20 spots, 46 to 26, and gave up that extra one. The reasoning is always, this is next year's first round pick today. This is next year's first round pick right now. The risk in that, of course, is it's not really that, because you gave up your 2 this year. So it's really next year's 1.
It is,
this
but
year's 2.
It's added to the second round that you're giving up.
It always comes down to, you expect this player to be worth at least 2 or 3 players, depending on how the trade unfolds. So it's an aggressive, bold move by the Falcons. But for a team that had one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL, to the point where they had to start using Caden Ellis as like a, blitzer, and, they had to do a whole bunch of gaga, as they call it, in the second, right? Disguise, and they just had to do a lot to get any kind of pressure on the quarterback. Maybe they can rush with 4 now, especially when you add Braylon Trice. They have Leonard Floyd there, who's a good 3. They have way more juice off the edge than they did last year at this time. We'll see how it all comes together.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, because I agree with their on-field evaluation. I think James Pierce Jr. belongs in the middle of the first round in this draft if you're viewing it strictly on the field. I think that's also true for Mike Green, though he slipped for an entirely different set of off-field issues. But I think all of those guys, and this is what we were saying when we were talking about where do these edge rusher goes, where do they go? Would they go to Carolina 8? Which one of these teams is going to pick which edge rusher? And it's like, if you want to ignore that guy's red flag, or you decide that that's not a problem, you clear him effectively. Any of those guys kind of belong in the middle of the first round. So from that point of view, I agree with their assessment, but I had never envisaged a world where they had already drafted Jalen Walker with that spot, and they then wanted the guy so much that they're willing to not only overlook the off-field concerns for him, but also then give up next year's first to trade back and get a guy when you've already targeted that position. So they didn't just double up a position, which itself would be, notable, right? If they come back in the second round and drafted an edge rusher, that would be getting people at least raising their eyebrows. They didn't just do that. They did it for a guy who has, attitude, professionalism type concerns, and they gave up next year's first to do it. So it's shocking / surprising in 3 separate ways, which is exactly like the Michael Penix Jr. thing last year. Like, they are, for 2 straight years, the Falcons have done something basically unprecedented.
I love it. That's what I love about it. I mean, that was my take coming out of the Michael Penix thing, which was, and I liked the Penix move probably more than this one. Like, as far as which one would I opt into, it's over investing in the quarterback position versus maybe giving up the future one and maybe giving up too many picks when we have some other depth needs or whatever. But I love it, man. Case studies, more case studies. These are fun. Falcons are giving us some fun stuff. I also like the other players that they got, particularly Xavier Watts in the 3rd round. That looks like an absolute steal. He reminded me of Kirby Joseph. He went 1 pick ahead of where Kirby Joseph was drafted a few years ago, the Lions safety. And I think Watts has similar ball magnet type of abilities, ball skills. I don't think he's the greatest athlete in the world, but I think he's fine. I think he can cover tight ends. Just dependable player, always seems to be in the right place at the right time. And a lot of people did have, and here's some perspective, I guess. Did they give up a 2 and a 1 essentially for Pierce? Yes. A lot of people had the Falcons, though, drafting edge in the 1st and then Xavier Watts in the 2nd. And you walk away with that. And it's like, oh, that's not bad. Yeah. Kind of came. So they come away with 2 edges and a Xavier Watts. I'm just saying, if before a week ago, if you said, here's what they're going to come away with, that would have been a pretty good haul. So I think those top 3 players really have a chance to overhaul this defense. Then Billy Bowman has some slot / safety ability coming out of Oklahoma. They've added some talent to the defensive side here. Yeah,
it's a fascinating draft. And of course, the other thing in this is, for 2 straight years, they've been slapped on the wrist by the NFL for something. They didn't have a 5th round draft pick this year because they forfeited it because of the Kirk Cousins tampering, right? Where he accidentally basically let slip to the press that he'd been talking directly to them as opposed to through his agent, which is an absurd line to be drawing in the sand, but nonetheless one that the NFL does draw in the sand. So that's how they lost a 5th round draft pick. And then coming out of this draft, they've been fined $250,000, and Jeff Ulbrich has been fined $100,000 for leaking unintentionally the number of Shedeur Sanders to cop that the prank.
I think that's ridiculous that he's been fined for that. Ulbrich.
I mean, I don't mind like the team being fined is fine because it's, a giant multi-billion organization. Who the hell cares? The Jeff Ulbrich individually being fined for his son effectively stealing his his iPad to get the number for it. I mean, on the one hand, it's harsh. On the other hand, there's sensitive stuff on there. Maybe lock your iPad.
Data security, fine. I don't know. Because if he doesn't make the phone call, he doesn't get fined, but he still had the same data security issue.
Yeah.
So it's literally the actions of his son that get him fined for $100,000, which is absurd. That's all. That's absurd. And I think the people calling for a fine also zip it.
The people. I mean, I don't really care that they fined either of them. I think both of them can take the fine and be fine. I think the people that were calling for Jeff Ulbrich's job are out of their minds. Like, the dude's kid effectively boosted his iPad and stole the phone number from it. I mean, you want Jeff Ulbrich fired for that? That's ridiculous.
I would say, A, be mad at the kid for doing it, and then B, just think back. I'm not saying you would have done this. I'm not saying 21-year-old you would have done the same thing as a kid, but just think back to 21-year-old you. Think back to a couple things you may have done that you were not proud of. Just saying. Get off your high horse, everybody.
Well, not just that.
Definitely not job worthy.
But also, start thinking about that in connection with the kids that are being drafted and being talked about as having, attitude or making mistakes. Like, so
Yeah.
the kid that pranked Shedeur Sanders and Shedeur Sanders, right? Like Shedor's getting ripped apart and said he's not worthy of being a quarterback in the NFL and he doesn't belong and he shouldn't be drafted and yada, 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 for potential lapses in judgment for being the same age as the kid that did an even dumber thing and got his dad fined $100,000. And like, kids at that age do stupid things, right? But because they're athletes, we're like, they're supposed to be perfect and ready to go right out of the gate. And this is true for James Pierce Jr. as well, right? Like he's at an age where he should be doing stupid things. And it's incumbent on the Falcons now to like keep him together and piece him back together and make sure that he becomes, the model professional that they need him to be at the next level. But we do tend to forget that kids that are 19, 20, 21 years old are generally not mature and shouldn't be.
But the difference is you're asking them. I'm not saying you need to criticize every last thing, but the teams have to account for all that because you're asking them to be mature professionals in 6 months or as of now. So You're asking them a high standard where like the average 21-year-old can do whatever job he wants, where maybe he can, act foolish for the next 5 years and then figure it out or whatever. Like football players don't have that ability. You're paying them for the next 4 years a lot of money to be mature. That's why that stuff has to be broken down, even if it's over the top sometimes.
You have to.
I have to put that out there.
You have to factor it in. What I'm saying is we need to be careful. Like the moral judgment on it is a different thing. Like as an NFL franchise, you have to evaluate how mature is this kid because we're about to hand him a boatload of money. And if he's immature and going to continue a pattern of mistakes and making bad decisions, we might end up wasting that money and wasting a draft pick and getting nothing in return for it, right? So the NFL teams have to evaluate that stuff and say, how likely is this guy to keep it together at the next level versus how likely is it to become this year's Jermaine Burton, right? Like that's the risk, because if he's not going to keep it together, he's Jermaine Burton this year and we just wasted money and a draft pick. But I think that this taking is as media or as people analyzing this from the outside, people, I think, rush to moral judgments on it, right? Like we can talk about, and James Pierce is a solid example of this. Like we can bring up the concerns that people have about whether he's going to be a good professional, whether he's going to put the effort in, whether he's going to, give everything he has to be the player that he can be. But there's a distinction between that and saying that's a very real risk for anybody drafting him in the first round and saying, being too moralistically judging about it, because most people were stupid when they were in their early 20s, right? Or late teens. It's just a reality of the world. Most people are not mature at that stage. They do dumb things. And if everything you did at that age in your life was on video or sent to people on a cell phone, you would not come out of that particularly well. I think so. Again, be careful throwing stones from your glass house is the point I would make there.
Yeah, like it. Just to put a bow on the Falcons, 26 on Renee Buchner's consensus, ranging from people A- to D. So wide range here for the Falcons in their process. D- actually. A- to a D-. I thought it was interesting. Case studies, fun for the second straight year for the Falcons. 31 teams down. We got one left here, Sam. Tampa Bay Bucks, the final draft to analyze here for the 2025 NFL draft. You're calling it a down the fairway draft. They got a whole lot of good football players. I like it for the second straight year. Emeka Egbuka in the first round. Ohio State wide receiver Benjamin Morrison, the Notre Dame corner in the second. Jacob Parrish, Kansas State corner in the third. Then back-to-back edge rushers in rounds 4 and 5. David Walker from Central Arkansas. Big Elijah Roberts from SMU. And then Tez Johnson in the 7th from Oregon. So, I mean, you called that the high. I mean, those are all just good football players. They're just all good football players, including Tez. I mean, I would call that the good football player that ran 4.51, way undersized, and that's what they got. So they just continued to grab good football players. Your thoughts on this Bucks draft here?
Yeah, I mean, I think they just drafted a series of extremely safe football players, guys who might not have like off the charts level of of upside, but were just really good. Yeah, by the way, Jay McGarry there mentions in the chat, I didn't mention the fact that the Falcons draft value-wise was by far and away the number one, according to Arif's work. So Falcons effectively had the most valuable draft relative to the capital that they expended in this entire thing.
Yeah. So you want to we'll start with the Ibuka at the top here for the Bucs. I have a soft spot for not drafting needs and getting good football players. So obviously I like this. The fact that the Bucs have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan on the roster did not keep them from getting Ibuka. I also don't think it diminishes the value because it's receiver. If it was a tackle and you have two starting tackles, you could argue, hey, this guy's never going to see the field. But as a receiver 4, Chris Godwin coming off of injury, I think he sees the field. And, the more I've watched Ibuka in this process, the more he grew on me. He was another character guy that everybody was raving about, but also I think he could play in the slot, tight splits, gets open. Ball skills were outstanding, especially at the catch point. Catches the ball really well. I think he moves well enough. So I think he's a really good player, and both in the short and long term, a really nice play here for the Bucs.
Yeah, Ibuka's an interesting draft pick because they didn't just not have a need at receiver. Like, they really don't have a need at receiver. They just brought back Chris Godwin and signed him to a lot of money to do that. They've got Mike Evans still there. They have, other options in that group. Jalen McMillan, who drafted, looks really handy and looks like there's a lot of redundancy in Ibuka to what they already have in Godwin and McMillan. And I think it's a case of, look, we're just going to take a really good football player. And Ibuka, I think, is one of the more interesting draft picks in the draft to me because pretty much everybody viewed him exactly the same. Like, he might have the narrowest range of evaluations of anybody out there. Everyone viewed him exactly the same, as he is a classic high-end number 2 receiver who exploits zones extremely well, who's good after the catch, who's powerful, who does everything really well, but doesn't really have number 1 upside. And the only difference really was, where do you value that? Do you think that's a second-round player? Do you think that's a high first-round player? Where do you put it? Evidently, the Bucs viewed it, not only is it worth a pick where they drafted him, 2/3 of the way through the first round, but it's worth doing that even if you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Jalen McMillan already on the roster. So a sort of fascinating evaluation of where the Bucs valued that skill set.
Interestingly enough, I put him in my notes. I put him on the big slot spectrum of like a Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Boyd, or Chris Godwin as far as that spectrum of players. So, I see the chat talking about Godwin might be cooked. If that's the case, then the Bucs extending him for $22 million a year might not have been the wisest thing in the world, but it is a nice security blanket if Godwin doesn't get back from the injury. Plus, he's getting a little bit older, obviously. So I like that as a pick. And again, everything else, Benjamin Morrison, we're calling this safe in football players, which is true. The risk with Morrison, though, is multiple hip injuries, surgeries, missing a lot of time last year. But again, when he's on the field, I think he's a first-round talent, Benjamin Morrison. And there's also a potential need at starting corner in a year, or as Jamel Dean gets a little bit older, figuring out his future. Are they going to re-sign Zion McCollum as a long-term play there? So I think Morrison, and then Parrish, a guy with inside-outside ability and some flexibility, tackles really well, just a really good football player to get in round 3. I guess you could call Morrison the riskiest of this group, though, just because of those hip injuries.
Yeah, they gave Chris Godwin $44 million guaranteed. So if he is cooked, that was a bad decision. The Ibuka thing is interesting. I don't think I would have drafted him there in isolation. Like, even if I had for a different team in that draft spot, I think I would have valued him a little bit lower than that. I do think, look, I had him ranked as like outside of my top 10 receivers, but 5 through 15 are all in a really tight bunch in this draft. So I would have drafted him a little bit lower than that. And particularly for Tampa Bay, who already have that much redundancy at that position, I would have gone a different direction. But I don't hate the idea that somebody else valued him at that level in the draft. And that's what makes it interesting. The Benjamin Morrison pick is the one, that I think it's the most risky for a safe player. Like, again, he might be the most technically sound cornerback in this draft, right? Just incredibly good technique, incredibly good fundamentals, but he has multiple season-ending hip surgeries. That's terrifying for a position like corner, where you need your hips. Like, it's the first thing you're going to hear about in a scouting report about a really good corner is fluid hips, incredible. Like, so that might not be the case anymore for Morrison. In the second round, that's pretty risky to me. But if you get him back, the player that he was before the hip injury, he's a first-round talent, I think. Jacob Parrish, really good player. The question mark, I guess, on him is exactly where he plays at the next level. He's, I think, going to get labeled as a slot guy based off his size, but he actually hasn't played in the slot that much. Like, he's been way more of an outside player at Kansas State. Feisty, runs really fast as well. So sort of feisty, undersized, but runs like a 4.35, like is a blazing fast guy. And then their day 3 picks, I think, are awesome. The David Walker. If I hadn't seen David Walker at the Senior Bowl, I would be so much higher on him. Because his PFF grading is like off the charts stupid. It's like 95, like, which is that's in the Nick Bosa world of like best pass rush performances we've ever seen. But it was at Central Arkansas, right? It was a much lower level of competition. I mean, Renner said it looks like high school tape, and I think it does for multiple reasons. Number one, because the disparity of how good he is versus the players he's beating up on. But number two, the players that he's beating up on sometimes look like high school players. So at the Senior Bowl, he was solid, but he didn't exactly set the world on fire. But in the 4th round, like, amazing value, I think. Elijah Roberts in the 5th round, great value. And then Tez Johnson in the 7th, like, that's one of the best value picks in the draft, I think. Like, unprecedented size, literally the lightest player, I think, in NFL history. And he ran a 4.5, so it's not like he had the timed blazing speed that people expected. But, dude, watch that guy at the Senior Bowl. Like, he just cooks people with quickness. That's going to play.
Yeah, I really like a lot of this draft. Here's Tez at the Senior Bowl if you're watching on YouTube. It's a year removed from drafting Bucky Irving, who had a pretty bad workout for his size and for a running back, Bucky Irving, and then looked pretty quick, pretty explosive on the football field last year for the Bucs. I would not be surprised if Tez does something similar, where the workout was disappointing, but all those movement skills play. So again, that's why I'm talking about they just got good football players. I think they ignored some bad workouts. Even in Elijah Roberts at 295 pounds, played edge at SMU, power player. So I love that 1-2 punch of him and David Walker being added to that edge room that has 1 year of Hassan Reddick, Yaya Diaby, who looks like he's ready to take another big step forward this year. Chris Braswell, who they got last year, who we described in the same manner, right? Just a good, fundamentally sound football player that they get maybe high in the second, but they got him, in the second round. So a nice edge rotation there. And the Bucs did not have any massive needs, but they added some excellent depth and players to compete and just elevate this roster.
And those reps that we showed from the Senior Bowl came against Azaria Thomas, the Florida State cornerback. I honestly think that Tez was responsible for dropping Thomas in this draft. Thomas ended up going in the 3rd round, 73 overall. We were talking about him as someone that could go at the bottom of the 1st round, would be a high 2nd round type of guy. Tez Johnson might have individually dropped Azaria Thomas like a full round in this draft by just wrecking the dude at the Senior Bowl all week. So Tez brings that kind of quickness and ability, also some return skills as well, if you're prepared to risk a 155-pound guy as a punt returner and a kick returner.
So yeah, my whole take on the Bucs during the draft here, as I tweeted out, was like, look, the Bucs are just, for the 2nd straight year, taking a whole bunch of good football players. And I get it, Bucs fans. You're like, wait, our whole roster is homegrown. Jason Light's been doing this for years. I'm not saying exclusively to the last 2 years. I'm just saying, in particular, the last 2 years, the better way of describing it for me is not a whole lot of players where you're saying, if this guy figures it out, if he gets better at this, if his production starts to match his athleticism. There's just not a whole lot of those players. From last year, Grant Barton being a plug-and-play interior O-lineman and playing center, to Chris Braswell, Tyke Smith, Jalen McMillan, Bucky Irving last year. Good football players you plug in and they play. This year seems similar. Abuka, Benjamin Morrison, Jacob Parrish, and then I would even say David Walker and Elijah Roberts as part of that defensive line rotation. And then Tez Johnson. It's going to be, on this team, it's going to be maybe easier to keep him off the field with all the receiver talent, but I think anywhere else it would be very difficult to keep Tez Johnson off the field and at least try to get the ball in his hands, create some mismatches, create some explosives with him. So I really like this Bucs draft top to bottom and a lot of the talent that they added.
Yeah, I think everybody they drafted should contribute in some way, shape, or form. Like it's difficult to find major roles for guys like Ibuka and Tez Johnson because of the players they've already got in the roster, but I think all of them have a pathway to being a useful part of the roster.
All right, so the consensus has the Bucs tied for 11th overall with their division rival Panthers, as I mentioned a little while ago, ranging from A to Thor's C-.
And then Arif's work has them with one of the most valuable drafts as well, one of the best value, the third most valuable.
Also rare for me, this is a 6-player draft. The 6-player draft plays with my brain. Once you're under 7, I'm like, oh man, this is tough for it to be good. But because they got wide receivers, corners, edge rushers, that makes it feel better. I compare this to the Bengals, who come away with maybe not even reaches, but 2 linebackers, a running back, a guard. It doesn't feel as good. Whereas with the Bucs, I mean, also the current roster helps it when you don't have a whole bunch of starting opportunities on your roster. But when you come away with a receiver, 2 corners, 2 edges, or whatever you want to call Roberts, maybe he's more of an interior player, and a receiver, it just feels better. Plus, I like the players here. So for a 6-player haul, I think the Bucs did a really nice job here.
They also brought in Desmond Watson as an undrafted free agent, which means they have both the heaviest and the lightest players in NFL history currently on the team. They had a pretty interesting undrafted free agent haul. They brought in Shiloh Sanders, who the other Sanders brother, to fly under the radar because of Shedeur. Shiloh Sanders, Will Shepard, the other Colorado wide receiver, they brought in as well. And as we said, Desmond Watson, the 465-pound defensive tackle.
Can we get Perna in your big video where everybody put their favorite prospects? Perna, he suggested Tez Johnson and Desmond Watson, his 2 favorite players, the heaviest and lightest ever, and they're both Bucs. Like we need a little, and then we got to rehash that.
It's obviously the long way to even making the team, but theoretically, right now, the Bucs can line up 2 defensive tackles next to each other that clock in at 810 combined pounds.
Oh, it's amazing. It would be amazing if he was just the tush push specialist. Like we're trying to beat the Eagles. Everybody's trying to beat the Eagles. We think this is our big year.
Double A gap with 810 pounds. I want to see how far they can push back the Eagles' interior offensive line.
The tush push defense in full effect. Plus, Watson has 100% of his carries go for first downs. Just saying. You have him and Vita Vea as lead. Vita's done some lead blocking. Get both of those guys out there.
And then with Tez, you've got the third option as well. Like you for some reason recently, this thing went viral again, where that Mike Leach had to be talked out of putting a little person in the backfield and throwing him over the line of scrimmage for a first down. Tez Johnson's in that kind of world, right? You're telling me that, we couldn't chuck Tez Johnson for 5 yards for a first down?
You definitely could. I would run the jet sweep with Tez behind Desmond Watson and Vita Vea coming out of the full house backfield, leading the way.
So what you need is, right, you need to work on the choreography where as he goes by, receives the handoff, the next thing that happens is the H-back to that side of the formation, like, hooks his arm like this, right? And you like hook Tez as he goes by and just hurl him forward.
That's like roller derby. The roller derby play.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying, right? Except instead of just launching him on wheels, you're getting him airborne. You're tossing him over the line.
I love how as soon as we finished team 32 of 32, you jumped right into off-season mode, right? It's like 100 humans versus 1 gorilla talk. I'm sure who are the top 100 football players to beat the gorilla? Compare QB prospects to the periodic table of elements. I mean, it's off-season mode now, Sam. We're getting what design plays for Tez Johnson. I'm sure that'll show up sometime in June here on Check the Mic. So that's it, man. That's it for us. 32 teams down. We still have a little bit more draft coverage, though. I mentioned special show tomorrow. We're going to have Lance Zerline. We're going to have Trevor Sikkema, Danny Kelly, all on the show tomorrow, giving their takes on the draft. You've heard our takes. You've heard, I don't know, let's call it 30 hours, almost 30 hours of coverage on the draft. It's time to let someone else speak. So we're going to have a fun little draft recap with some other experts here tomorrow. And yeah, man, been fun. 32 teams. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. I mean, it's been our biggest week, best week. We appreciate everybody being here throughout the whole thing. The channel's growing. We were just celebrating 40,000 subscribers, and we're pushing 42. Those little wins for the team here, making everybody feel good for all the time and effort that we put in, and we just owe it all to everybody listening and watching and just joining us throughout this entire draft season here.
Yeah, so hit the subscribe button on the way out. We are the channel is absolutely growing. It's awesome to see, and a huge thank you to all you guys for showing up and watching along with us for draft season. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be doing off season, and then we're back into the grind. Like, there is no NFL off season, right? We're going to be doing off season content, and then straight into the next preseason, and away we go again.
Yeah, we'll probably cut down to 2 shows a week at some point. We'll probably take a week or 2 off at some point, maybe to take a little vacation. But other than that, we're still here. So stick around all off season. We'll have some fun. Send us your ideas too. Check the mic at the33team.com if there's anything fun you want to see.
And then we have the excitement of the new studio on its way still that didn't quite get in there for the draft. That was always optimistic and hopeful rather than expectation. But now we'll be working on that and getting in there at some point.
All right. That's it for us today. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. for more Check the Mic.